Big Finish's The Third Doctor Adventures are going through like two separate strands at the moment. You've got the stories which are trying to be incredibly faithful to Season 7 or Season 11 production values with the sound design, with the casting, with the type of stories that they tell. You've got these stories like Intelligence for War, which is like an epic 6 or 7 part Season 7 type story. You've got these stories called like Revolution in Space, which has got Tim Traylor and Sadie Miller as the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith trying to recreate the Season 11 vibes, and everything from the music and the sound effects is trying to ape this particular feeling. However, the second strand that the Third Doctor Adventures is currently doing are these stories which see the return of Katie Manning as Jo Jones. Not Jo Grant, because this is Jo in the future. This is Jo in the present day after the passing of her husband Cliff, and she reunites with the Third Doctor and has a brand new run of adventures with the Third Doctor, played by Tim Traylor. The Return of Jo Jones box set from 2023 I thought was okay, but honestly there wasn't too much to it. I didn't really have any inclination to revisit it. It was just some fine stories re-establishing this familiar yet somehow slightly different pairing, with the casting of Tim Traylor instead of John Pertwee and an older Katie Manning playing an older Jo Jones. We now have the follow-up box set for The Return of Jo Jones. This is the Quintessence. This is a 6-part horror story with the Mondasian Cybermen, written by Stuart Pringle and Lauren Mooney. If you folks have not been keeping up to date with my Big Finish reviews, then let me tell you, Stuart Pringle and Lauren Mooney are one of my favourite Big Finish writing teams at the moment. In terms of modern Big Finish, they should be writing for the show proper. Their specific reference points for horror, for humour, for references is like perfectly in tune with me. We're even to the point where, you know, I don't think that all of their stories are home runs, but I still really appreciate what they're going for, and I really, really vibe with them. And they've had an incredibly strong year doing stories for the 8th Doctor. They've done some Torchwood stuff as well. They've done some stories for the 9th Doctor. And now we have the Quintessence, which sees the 3rd Doctor and Jo Jones travelling in the 42nd century. They land on a barren, distant storm world of Nadara Reach, and the reason they've landed there is that Jo Jones has been having strange dreams where they are communicating to her very specific temporal space-time coordinates, and the Doctor puts them in the TARDIS, and despite it being a 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance that a random string of numbers will have them land on a planet in space, it turns out that these coordinates are the real deal. So they go to this world and they stumble across a Victorian manor house, despite it being the 42nd century. The Doctor and Jo are greeted inside of the manor house by the Pepperdine family. You've got Arthur Pepperdine, you've got Lucy, and their ill daughter, Emmeline, played by Chris Larkin, Emily Joyce, and Felicity Cant, respectively. They are communing with angels. In the storm, they're alone on this world. They're in this manor house, which has a few strange details to it, where the paintings are just a little bit off. The books they're old and they're really weathered, but they're brand new, and they're not like Victorian literature. They're like rocket manuals. They're scientific documents and instruments and such. So while the Third Doctor humours the Pepperdine parents with a seance to commune with the angels, Jo Jones uses her initiative to go upstairs and talk to the daughter, who is very ill, who is having strange dreams, and seems to have some sort of latent telepathic abilities. Let's play a clip from The Quintessence.
I'm so tired these days. I sleep so much. It gets hard to know what's real and what I've only dreamt.
Oh, you look tired now, Emmeline. Perhaps I ought to leave you to rest.
Oh, please, don't do that. I don't know anything about you yet. I want to ask you all kinds of questions.
I can come back. I just don't want you tiring yourself out.
Oh, be careful, I promise. I want to know everything.
I'm very glad you're staying.
Thank you for allowing me to. It's been quite a while since I've attended a séance, and even longer since I spoke with an angel.
They'll be so happy you've come.
Do you think so?
They know how lonely we are, how hard it has been for us. All they want is for Emmeline to get well. They help us so much.
What do you mean, help?
They've given us so much guidance. Her treatments.
Lucy, help me with this, will you?
Of course.
Josephine, from the other side of the stars. I want to hear all about your adventures. Fields of snow, rivers winding through emerald forests, jungles, and so many flowers, real flowers, plastic flowers.
Plastic? You're really staring at me, Emmeline. I feel as if you could almost see into my soul.
I'm sorry. Am I being rude?
No, I don't mind. What were you thinking about?
Just... It seems I know you a little already.
Spoiler warning, the Cybermen are involved, but to what extent and what their end game is, and basically anything beyond part 2 of this 6-parter, I'm not going to divulge. I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible. But recently I listened to another 6-part Big Finish Doctor Who story. I've recorded the review of it, but it's not currently live at the time of this live stream. And it's basically 6 parts in a single location, or 5 parts in a location and then an epilogue in a different one. The Quintessence does what I think a great 6-parter Doctor Who Big Finish story should do, and it's segmented into different settings, different, in some cases, genres as well, and to a lesser extent, different supporting casts. The Quintessence is a 6-part, 3-hour Doctor Who story with a pretty small cast of characters. You've got the Doctor, Jo Jones, the Cybermen, the Pepperdeens, and a character called Drexel, who I won't really be able to touch upon because of spoiler details. It's a really small cast, but you get 3 hours of adventure out of it. And, oh boy, if I can tell you folks, the Quintessence is possibly the first time that, in a long time, where I've been genuinely quite unnerved by a Doctor Who story. It was very fitting for this box set, this story, to release in October, because it's genuinely effective, haunted house, Victorian Gothic, sci-fi body horror. It genre hops and setting hops really, really effectively. And I love listening to behind-the-scene interviews where Stuart and Lauren, they're married, they're a couple. And Lauren was saying, okay, so I wrote a bit of this, and then I was kind of worried about how would the Doctor and Jo get out of this situation and what to do next. So then I just pass it over to Stuart to get me out of this. And it sounds funny, and maybe there's some truth in it as well. But whatever formula they've got for writing Doctor Who, it's a winning formula. This is a stonking great story. This is probably the best Third Doctor release since The Devil's Hoofprints, 3-4 years ago? It's a top-tier Third Doctor story, but it's also an incredibly terrific Cyberman story. Early on, the Third Doctor gives Jo a quick lowdown, the quick summation of the origins of the Cybermen, and he describes them as having a curse. Not in a literal sense, but the fact that they've basically done the ultimate sacrifice. They've made a pact to continue surviving by removing their humanity. And I think the use of the word curse there is really, it really hits home the story of the Mondasians in the Doctor Who universe as being one of a tragedy, that they converted themselves to survive, to save themselves and their loved ones. And the Quintessence as well goes to great lengths to show what someone will do on behalf of those that they love, whether it's Jo or those in the Pepperbeam family. We also get a really fascinating bit of cyber lore with what appears to be the origins of the cyber planner, with some visceral images, mental images while listening to this audio that will genuinely kind of stick with me. It's the type of body horror that I've not really heard Big Finish dive into since Spare Parts. And Spare Parts it feels like a bit of a reductive reference point, because it's, Big Finish and it's a Cyberman, Mondasian Cyberman story, with Nicholas Briggs doing a great job with the sing-song voices, emulating Roy Skelton in the 1960s. But it does feel like an appropriate comparison in terms of just how dark it goes, the images it conjures with its terrific sound design and descriptions and concepts, and also just in terms of the psychological horror of it. Part 5, in particular, is the type of psychological horror slow burn that I think you couldn't get away with on TV, like serialized Doctor Who. Like, because the idea of having to watch that, where in theory not a lot is accomplished, but and then it's like, okay, you've got a week to wait now to watch the next episode. But when you're binging it for Big Finish, if you do choose to binge it, like I do, then it works as not only a calm before the storm of part 6, but also getting us in the headspace of Jo Jones, because she is really the heart of the story here. She is the moral glue holding everything together. Via the Void in the chat asks, is any of it set on Mondas? Yes, but I won't say to what extent or when that happens or too much more. It starts off as a gothic horror with seances and angels and some really interesting images and concepts of like moving paintings and telepathy and dreams and stories. And then it goes further into the metaphorical looking glass, which I think is appropriate considering some of the psychological landscapes that the characters find themselves on over the course of the story. Goes through the looking glass into fights for survival, moral ambiguity, and just really what it will, just how far these moral dilemmas will push certain people. When the credits rolled, I say rolled, it's an audio drama. When the credits finished, I just sat with it for a few minutes. I just sat with the story. And I can't remember the last time I've done that for Doctor Who. Not just Big Finish, but the TV or the books or any of the expanded media. On the Big Finish app where I listen to these, it auto plays the interviews for it. And, there's like nearly 50 minutes of interviews. There's a great value prospect to this. But the interview started and I was like, nope, stop. Now, I need a minute, because the exploration of characters from the Third Doctor and his relationship with Jo seeing a young child in need, in this case Emmeline Pepperdine, played by Felicity Kent, who does a terrific job, who is endearing but quietly horrifying as well. This really poorly girl who relates and connects with Jo on a really deep emotional level. And Jo, who... This is a story where you could not have the Third Doctor and Jo Grant when she was in her early 20s working with you. You couldn't do this type of story because Jo Jones has been, she's lived a full life between meeting the Third Doctor before and now meeting him again for these Big Finish stories. And she's got children, she's got grandchildren, and that natural connection to family and children that she didn't really have, or she had to a much lesser extent in the 1970s on TV. It's a different story if you put in Jo Grant as opposed to Jo Jones. Tim Treloar has been, he's terrific as usual. He's really, really great. He says in the interviews that he kind of felt like the Third Doctor was a bit out of character and a bit too afraid, really wanting to get out of there, let's leave this place, Jo. I think compared to his TV adventures, I think Tim's got a point, and I think those concerns are, for the most part, kind of well-founded. But for me, it added an extra layer of horror to the story, where, the Doctor, the avatar of heroism and adventure, particularly the Third Doctor, of like action adventure, he knows that this isn't right. He knows that this is a very unique type of horror that he's trying to protect Jo from and everyone else around him. And Jo is just so committed to her moral principles that she charges forward anyway. And because it's ultimately her story, it makes sense for the Third Doctor to, for the sake of moving the plot forward, or to create a bit of conflict and drama, to be a little bit out of character. But like I said, I think even him being, quote, out of character is still, it works for the horror of the story. I think it benefits it because it's like the Doctor is saying, get out of here. So maybe you should get out of here. This is something quite distinct and different. This is really, really a terrific, terrific story. It's got some horrific moments of body horror, great implementation of cyber lore, like the Cyber Planner, like the Cybermats. For those who consider stories like World Enough in Time to be peak Cyberman fiction, as opposed to non-fiction, then the Quintessence is essential listening. 6 parts. It uses those roughly that 3-hour runtime to cosmically ambitious, brilliant effect. I think the cast are outstanding. The sound design is top notch. And like I said, I can't remember the last time a Doctor Who story has genuinely kind of scared me and got under my skin as I was listening to it. Not just because of the implied gore and the implied violence, which is probably on par with something like Spare Parts, but also just what it says about people and humanity, and why the Cyberman story, the best Cybermen stories, are ones which put the focus and the forefront of the Cybermen as being a tragedy for humanity. They are an all-conquering race. They are an all-converting, powerful army. You can get that in stories like Nightmare in Silver, like Rise of the Cybermen. To an extent, those are valid interpretations. That's one of the great aspects about Doctor Who, where these creatures created nearly 60 years ago have such great utility and functionality in different stories and different settings. It's why the Daleks work so incredibly well. How you can have an allegory for Nazi Germany, obviously, but then in the 1970s it becomes something like freedom fighters and the IRA. You can have stories in the 1980s as well talking about healthcare. You can have stories in the 2000s with game shows, etc. I'm rambling at this point. The Cybermen have equal effective utility, but for my money, they are at their best when they explore the prior humanity of them. It's why they are, in concept, my favourite Doctor Who villain, my favourite Doctor Who creation. And the Quintessence is probably the best Cyberman story that I've listened to on Big Finish since I started reviewing Big Finish. I know that there haven't been that many Cybermen stories over the past few years. I don't want that to sound like I'm damping it with faint praise, but the Quintessence is probably making my top 5 of 2024. I'd be shocked if it didn't. And I think if you have any reservations about the Third Doctor range, you might be able to get away with skipping the Return of Jo Jones and jumping straight into this. But the Return of Jo Jones, particularly Jo's grieving of her husband, I think it's added character work that is worth diving into before going into the Quintessence. Where does this rank for Cyberman stories overall? I have not listened or read or engaged with all Cyberman stories, unfortunately, so it cannot be a complete list. I've only read like The Flood in terms of comics. I've not read that many books with the Cybermen. But in terms of, if you compare it with like TV adventures, it's like top 3, maybe top 2, maybe top 1. I don't know. It's up there. Certainly it's up there. If you go to, one second, Big Finish have collections. Cybermen. What was the last Cyberman story? No, actually, I've been forgetting. The Cybermen have had a pretty good run past couple of years. The only story that kind of gives it competition is Sins of the Flesh from the 11th Doctor Chronicles Everywhere and Anywhere, written by Alfie Shaw, where the Cybermen, this is what I'm on about when it comes to these villains being used for different utilities. They're used as an allegory for conversion therapy for LGBTQ plus people and evangelical Christianity. It's with Sins of the Flesh. It's a bit tough to compare because Sins of the Flesh is like an hour-long story as part of a broader season, whereas this does have a 6-part format, a 3-hour runtime. It's tough to compare, but the Quintessence is up there with stories like Sins of the Flesh, like stories like Spare Parts, like the best Cyberman stories like Ward Enough in Time, like Tomb of the Cybermen. Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle have been like some of the big writers to watch from Big Finish over the past couple of years. Some of the vibes I got from it as well reminded me of Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle's own Poppet from the Torchwood range, which came out in January 2024, where it's like these really eccentric, cursed characters doing creepy things while these otherwise like normal people are just surrounded by madness. Poppet's terrific. Like Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle, they should be writing for Doctor Who the TV show. If Rusty Davis has not sent them a friendly email over the past couple of years, something has gone dreadfully wrong in the realms of Bad Wolf as far as I'm aware. They're a terrific pairing, and have I sold it enough? Have I praised it enough? No. The Quintessence is top tier, Big Finish. One of the favourites, one of the best of 2024. Stonking great stuff.